Bones tremble. Jesus, Jesus, silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, sing Jesus, 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 you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, your name is a light that the shadows can't deny. Your name cannot be overcome. Your name is a light forever lifted high. Your name cannot be overcome. Sing Jesus, 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 you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, you silence every fear. Jesus, 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 your name is a light that the shadows can't deny. Your name cannot be overcome. Your name is a light forever lifted high. Say your name, it cannot be overcome. Say your name that the shadows can't deny. No, your name cannot be overcome. Your name is a light forever lifted high. Yes, your name cannot be overcome. Come on, shout it out, sing Jesus, 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 you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, come on, sing Jesus, 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 you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, silence fear. You make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, come on, sing it out. Silence fear. Oh, Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, come on, one more time, sing Jesus. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, oh, you silence fear. Oh, Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus.
Right. Good morning, Oasis. It's really exciting to connect with you guys again this morning. I want to say really a special welcome to everyone that is joining us today for the very first time as a guest. We are so honored that you're connecting with us today and we get to spend this time together. Today is going to be a little bit different. Usually on Sunday, we have one of our pastors speaking, but today we're going to have a panel discussion. We're just going to have a conversation on race, and also I have on stage here some amazing people, my friends, and we're going to talk about parenting in our culture today as black parents. Parenting as black parents in our culture today. And here's why this is so important, because this is the message of the cross. This is the gospel. This is why Jesus came and died on the cross for us. He died to reconcile us to the Father and to one another. This is the gospel. This is the reason why Jesus gave up his life, so that there will be reconciliation between us and the Father, but also between us, one another. And today I want to begin the conversation by just, before I introduce our panel, I just want to draw our attention to the scripture, what the Bible have to say about race and reconciliation. In Ephesians chapter 2, Paul wrote to the church in Ephesus, and he said this in verse 14. He said, our reconciling peace is Jesus. Our reconciling peace is Jesus. He has made Jew and non-Jew one in Christ. By dying as our sacrifice, he has broken down not some. He has broken down every wall of prejudice that separated us and has now made us equal. He broke down every wall of prejudice that separated us and has now made all of us equal through our union with Christ. And then he went on to say this in verse 15 of Ephesians chapter 2. He said, ethnic hatred has been dissolved by the crucifixion of his precious body on the cross. 2, verse 16, 2 have now become one, and we live restored to God and reconciled in the body of Christ. We live restored first to God and reconciled in the body of Christ. The body of Christ is us. Is black, is white, is Latino, is Asian. That is the body of Christ. And Paul is saying here that Jesus died on the cross to restore us to God and to reconcile us one in the body. And when there's racial discrimination, the question that we have to ask is, do we actually understand the meaning of Jesus' death and resurrection? Because he died to reconcile us to God and to one another in his body. And I love what Paul said in verse 16. He said, through his crucifixion, hatred died. Through his crucifixion, hatred died. So whereas we have to face the question, if there's hatred in our culture today, do we truly grasp the death of Jesus and his resurrection? Because what Paul is saying here, where there is true understanding of the death and resurrection of Christ, hatred is crucified, is dead. Paul is very clear. This is the gospel. We cannot preach the gospel about restore relationship with God and not talk about reconciling relationship with one another. We cannot speak about our restoration with God and forget our reconciliation with one another. Whenever we forget reconciliation with one another, we're not preaching the full gospel. Because the true gospel and the full gospel is to God and to one another. And I love what Paul said in 2 Corinthians 5, verse 19. He said, God has given us, He has committed to us the message of reconciliation. God does the reconciliation, but He has given us the message of reconciliation. So what we're doing here today, as we talk about parenting as black parents, we are trying to bring this message out so that people can understand some of the things that we have to walk through with our children in the culture that we live in today. All right? So as a black parent, watching the case and the video of Albury, I was left wondering, I just grieve the loss of my younger sister, right? And I'm still grieving that, right? And now I'm watching this, and it's almost like I have to start grieving again. You grieve the loss of Ahmed, but we have to grieve also those who are still alive, because you have to have this conversation with your kids. And when you see it, you cannot unsee it again. It is stuck in your mind, and you have to wrestle with it. So today, I'm really honored to have with me here my friends to just talk about this. How are you guys as parents? How are you wrestling with the racism and the issues in our culture today? And how are you able to walk your children through all of this as you raise them as the future generation, right? So first of all, I'm just going to go around and introduce our panel. Right here next to me is Leon. Leon, a very good friend of mine. And then next to him is Drika. Drika is amazing, wonderful friend of mine too. And next to Drika is Madi. Madi is amazing and very funny. He tells a lot of funny jokes, and I love him. And then next to Madi is Rudy. Rudy has been really an amazing friend, and when it comes to conversation on race, I just pick my phone and I ring this guy and I say, hey, let's talk through this, because he will put language into things that I'm wrestling with, and it really has been an incredible knowing you and journeying together. And Leon has also been, Leon and his wife actually led our RISE conversation here that we did in the city, conversation on race and unity. So I'm really honored to have you guys here on this panel, and just to talk about just even looking at the recent case, the recent tragedy that happened in our nation. So we can go back and we can look at history and see so many of those events. I mean, death and whenever we experience something like that, people say a lot of things, but it seems like we cannot just say we're moving on. It's like you cannot just say, hey, I've seen this, now let's move on, because it's just kind of built on and it's just constantly adding on, right? So Today, I really want us to wrestle with that as black parents raising future generation. How does all this inform the way you communicate with your children as you prepare them to step into the world?
Pastor William, thank you very much for having this conversation, especially in the light of the events that are happening now. In order for me to kind of put that question into context, let me put my background into context to kind of give you an idea. So first of all, I was raised in L.A., Lower Alabama. And in that, my parents grew up in segregated schools. So my parents went through all of the Jim Crow. So my parents experienced the cross burning. So my parents experienced everything that the South had to offer when it comes to racism. So much so that in the area that I grew up, there was a little town that's called Gant, Alabama, which happens to be my last name, which happens to be the plantation that my people were actually on. You can still go there now and still see some of the slave quarters that are there. So just to kind of put that in context. So for me, race and the talk has been something from very beginning. So from the first time that I can go out on my own, it was what my parents taught me about because it was what they experienced. And there was two phases of the talk. One was how to survive. The other one was how to be successful. So the survival talk was about how do you interact with the cops or the police that are out there? What is it that you can do? What is it that you can't do? The whole method behind that talk was survive to get back home. Get back home to live another day. The other side of that talk was how to be successful. It was you're never going to be given anything. You must be twice as good as the next white person. And this is something that was drilled into me all the time. Education. The one thing that I remember that my parents used to always tell me was education is the most important thing because it is the one thing they cannot take away from you. They can take away your freedom, but they cannot take away what you learn. So for me, the talk was always two-phase. One was just how to live, how to survive, how to get back home alive when I went out in the world. And the other one was when I'm out in the world, how do I make myself successful?
It's good. Now, Draco?
For me, my upbringing was a little bit more relaxed. I was raised in Lancaster, South Carolina, which, of course, is still in the South. I was the baby of the family, so a lot of things were maybe a little more sheltered for me. No matter what, the part that sticks out for me in relation to this conversation is that I learned no matter where I went, who I met, or what experience I had, that I was still a black girl. And that part was what was difficult for me as a child. You can do all the things to succeed, as Leon is speaking of. You give your best, you do your all, and I seemed to be faced with the fact that I was still just a black girl. And for me, that was very belittling at an early childhood stage. So in moving forward, I taught myself, and I still say to myself, I am more than just a black girl. And raising 3 young black men, now I have to instill that in them, and that's been very detrimental in my parenting. I have to have them understand you are more than what your skin presents to the world. I want them to know that you are not inferior to anyone because of your skin, and that's something that I think having that constant reminder in my childhood, that stands out for me, and it resonates to me that I am not less than because I'm black. And I will always try to instill that into my children, that you are not less than because you're black. Your blackness is everything. And that's important, especially in the South. I mean, because you don't get the praise. Well, praise is not even the right word. You don't get the respect when you have brown skin. And there were times when I thought that as a parent, I could change that within my culture and my own family, and I could expose them to things that did not relate to their skin. But in reality, my oldest child is 8, and it's been very prevalent and very obvious that skin very much is still an issue.
So Drika's from South Carolina and Leon from L.A., Lower Alabama. I'm from the north, Akron. And growing up, we didn't have a lot of conversations about race in my house. I went to probably 98% white school for grade school, so pre-kindergarten through 6th grade, and also lived in a mostly white neighborhood growing up. But one thing I remember clearly from my childhood, there's a bad term that some people refer to black people as, and we call it the N-word. But I remember when we first moved into the mostly white neighborhood, I was running around with some of the kids, and I actually called a white boy something bad that we refer to, that some people refer to white people as. And word got back to my mom that I called this white boy this name, and she tore me up so bad. She let me know that some people may call us the N-word that are non-black, but we're not going to call names of other people and other racist derogatory names.
Well, we have, I guess, L.A. and, more of the South, and you're from Ohio. I'm from New Jersey. I was born and raised in New Jersey, but my father's family is from Wilson, North Carolina, which is a small town. And when we would go to my grandfather's home, we would have to drive through cotton fields in order to get to his home. And my mother, who had me in the early 80s, which was a little bit of a different era in terms of how to raise young black men compared to how she was raised. I say my mother because my father passed away, was killed by a white man who was driving drunk. He was drunk and high on weed, and my father was crossing the street, and he was killed. And I think I got an early lesson on the way in which white people received a different treatment, because he was given a manslaughter charge, and he had been given 5 years in prison or something to that effect, and he served less than that. And he gave a testimony in court around his family and around how he shouldn't have to experience this great loss. But, my family, we had 6 sisters and brothers. And my mother was married to my dad for 14 years. So my mother ended up raising 7 children on her own, never remarrying, always saying that God is now our father, always saying that God is going to be a husband to her and a father to us. And so the conversations that my mother had around race with me kind of was like Leon, in that there was a protective conversation because she was worried about her sons. There were 3 of us. And then there was an educational conversation around what you need in order to have success. And then there was also a relational conversation, who you can be in relationship with and who you can't be in a relationship with, because of the way in which, as a black man, if you do date outside of your race, particularly white women, you are going to catch a societal kind of hatred that is going to come from both sides. You're going to catch it from black people, and you're going to catch it from white people, and then your children are going to be just exposed. And so there were lots and lots of conversations, but I just remember how vividly, for her as a black woman raising 7 children, there was a large emphasis on the decision that you make in terms of who you want to be with is going to govern so much of how people view you. And if you decide to be with a white person, there are going to be some challenges. And those challenges are going to come because people are going to hate on you and hate you for taking away their women. And this was an O.J. trial. I don't know if y'all remember. Of course, you remember the O.J. trial. There were lots and lots of just Rodney King. And I just remember coming up in that era and being told, as a black man, as a growing black man, entering into relationships, when it comes to race, make sure you watch how white people view you as a black man if you decide to be in a relationship with someone outside your race.
Wow. That is amazing. Now, I know that you guys had these conversations with your parents as young black male or female growing up, and then you step into the world and you started experiencing things, right? So you started with the conversation at home growing up, and now you step into the world, you begin experiencing some of the things that probably your parents were either protecting you from or were preparing you as you step into the culture to be successful. Now, with your experience and also the conversations that you had with your parents, in addition to what we're seeing today in our culture, and recently we just saw a tragedy that, no one, not even skin color, no one should experience something that Ahmaud Arbery went through. And thinking about his parents, right? Thinking about his mom, thinking about his dad, thinking about the relation, his friends, and all of that. And this is just one case. We have series of those events. How does all of this inform the way you have conversations with your children in regards to race and racism? I'll start with you, Rudy.
Well, I think the conversation in my house is ongoing. Excuse me. There is no need for a case like Ahmaud Arbery's case to bring about this conversation. But when cases like this do occur, there is an extra emphasis on, see, I told you so. See, this is another example as a parent that I had to warn you about. And so I need you, son, I need you, daughter, to be extra careful with how you are being perceived, which is such a terrible burden to place on my children. I have to say to them, be careful when you wear that hoodie, because how it makes you look. Be careful when you are walking late at night or when you're trying to come home and it's getting dark. Be careful not to look too long in a particular direction if somebody's garage is open. Be careful, and it's all of these different things that as a parent, I find myself having to warn my child of, which only puts them in a position to have to carry a burden that they shouldn't have to carry at no matter what the age is.
When it comes to my boys, I teach them to be aware that there may be people out there in the world, in the workplace even, like when you go for a job interview or you're working somewhere, there may be some people that, because of the color of your skin, they may think that you're less of a person than you are. So I know in my past I've had job interviews like maybe 20 years ago. Maybe the person interviewing me, when I talk to them on the phone, they may not be able to detect that I'm black. But when I show up for the interview, I know that I was overqualified for the job and maybe never heard from them after the interview. So I told myself maybe I was not hired because of the color of my skin. But now in this day and age, we have LinkedIn. Someone can look you up and see a picture of you before you interview. So if you get to an interview, you can probably assume strongly that the person doesn't have a problem with the color of your skin.
I have a simple example of a practical explanation of what you're asking. One of my friends, a white woman, who lets her child take a bike ride all through their neighborhood freely, as any child should be able to do, with restraint. I was asked, why won't I allow my children to take bike rides through the neighborhood? I'm being overbearing, I'm being, all the things. But when I had to explain to my child why I cannot allow you to take a bike ride alone, it wasn't so easy of a conversation to have. Having something like what we just experienced in our news right now gives me another practical example to my child of why I cannot allow you to take a simple bike ride alone. This is the extra pressure that we have to put onto our children that, again, as Rudy said, they don't deserve, but it's necessary. And as a parent, it's difficult to put that on your child day after day after day, but you have to, and you have to use these unfortunate circumstances to explain why you have these limitations and why things are not the same for you as they are for everyone else. That's very unfair, it's cruel, it's harsh, but it's real, and that's the real world that we live in. There are things that I don't want to have to impose upon my children right now, but I feel that if I don't, I'm doing them a huge disservice. A huge disservice.
You know, just to echo everyone here saying the same, is like, I don't want to have this conversation. I don't want to have to tell my son this, right? I don't have to tell my daughter this. I want them to have the simple joy of being a kid, right? Of being to just going out and just be happy-go-lucky and kind of do what they want to do and just be a kid. I mean, there is so much that is formulated when you are able to be free to be a kid, right? And it kills me when I have to take that innocence away, right? I still remember the first time I had to take it away from Trey. And I tried to wait as long as I possibly could because I knew that for me, it was from birth. From birth, I was told. And I was like, because the Lord blessed me and I was in different social economic arenas, maybe he can give me a little more time. Maybe I can give this a little more time of being innocent, of being a kid. But then, and I told my wife that, you know what, it's not a matter of if, it's when, which is so terrible to think about that. But sure enough, he was in school, and he got called the N-word. He was 12 years old. I had held off until then because nothing really came up. Once that happened, that was when I had to take everything away from him, and he became a man right then and there. He no longer could just go around a neighborhood. He had to think about how other people perceived him. When he was on a lacrosse team, and they were at a coach's house, and they were playing this little game where they would all run around, and this is in a gated neighborhood. And they all had hoodies on. And my son is a big kid, right? He's head and shoulders above the other kids. And I couldn't let him play because there's no way I can allow him to run through the backyard in a well-to-do neighborhood with a hoodie on with dark skin. It is impossible. And for me, having to tell him that because he loved his friends, but having to tell him that we had to leave broke his heart. And they don't understand now. They don't understand that these are rules that we're putting in place. It's not going to really click until they become grown. But those are the kind of things that I had to talk with him. He runs in his neighborhood now. And before I'm thinking, you know what, maybe I have solace, and maybe there's some things that he can do that I don't have to worry about. Just something, right? Even when he goes into the store, I tell him, never put your hands in your pocket. I mean, it's just like what Rudy was saying. There are just this laundry list of rules that you got to have, right? You can't go in with a hoodie on. You can't have your hands in your pocket, right? You can never put your hands in your pocket, right? You just don't have that liberty. But trying to him getting ready, getting in shape for lacrosse. He'd been running in the neighborhood. And I'm thinking, okay, that's good. And, you know, the neighbors, they know me. That's it. But then when I saw this happen, I was like, wow, now he can't just have in his mind that I'm doing this to get better. It's now he has to be distracted in, is someone approaching me? Now he has to look over his shoulder while he runs, and he's 15 years old. So he doesn't get out there to have the joy of running, the joy of getting better. It is, okay, I'm doing this, but wait a minute, I see that car coming at me. Do I need to pay attention to that, right? Which now there's a stutter step. So it's always that thing, and having to have that conversation just completely kills me. Because and now my daughter runs, and so I go down and I watch him now. Before I didn't, and I try, and I'm still trying to protect my daughter. So I really talk to her a lot, but I've had to talk to her about her body, right? She is an athlete. And a lot of her friends are these white little girls that are skinny, and they all call her fat. But she is an athlete. So then I have to give her body positive talks. And it's because of who she is, these other little girls. But now she runs with my son. And when I was down there, she says, Dad, what are you doing down here? You never come down here. And I don't want to shatter her. My son knows, but I don't want to tell my daughter. So I say, hey, I just enjoy watching y'all run. So I always try to save as much as I possibly can, but I also know, and again, you said absolutely right, a disservice, because there could be something that I miss that could cost them their lives.
You know, Leon, you mentioned your 12-year-old son, and when your son was 12, and the difference of how he was perceived running in the neighborhood now at 15. And this morning I brought my son here with us because I, too, have noticed the transition that I've seen in how he was once perceived as a cute little boy, but now that he's 12, he's a little man now. And so I want to bring Tiger up, if that's all right, because I think his insight adds to what children like him in this position may be experiencing. Come on, bud. still my cutie. Right here, come on around here. You know, it's interesting because from the time that he was born, I knew that I would be having conversations like this with him. Obviously, I didn't think that we'd be on a church stage having this conversation, so I appreciate William having this conversation in a way that speaks to God's heart. But Tiger, you know, you've been my little boy, the cute kid with the cute hair. And now, as you have just turned 12, and we've been having more conversations. One of the things that I did as your dad was get you this book on the definitive history of racism in America. And we've been having more intentional conversation, especially around Ahmaud Arbery's death. What's been your reaction? How have you felt entering into this next phase of having to deal with race?
I don't really, I feel like I need to pay attention to what I'm doing and always, I always need to think about what I'm going to do before I do it so that I'm not looked at as like that one kid or that black kid, you know, that doesn't, you know, isn't like everyone else.
And you mentioned isn't like everyone else, and we just, in preparation and just driving over here just before we got into the car, I asked you about, you know, what's the difference in being with your white friends and being around friends who look like you, and you made an interesting comment around the difference. Do you want to share that comment?
I said that when I'm out with my white friends in public, I feel more safe and protected. But when I'm with my black friends, I always have to like look over my shoulder to make sure that like we're not looked at like, or we're not seen as dangerous. Because when I'm with my white friends, I know that like nobody's gonna come at us or come at me because I'm with them.
You know, there's something so damaging about that. You know, about, you know, my son not feeling safe and around people who look like him, not because they are a danger, but because that's the way he knows society views a group of black boys differently than a group of white boys. And it's tough as a father coming into a church space knowing that we could be sitting here singing, worshiping God, and yet we could have such different experiences about how we feel God, how we think God acts on our behalf, how the person next to you might be praying to a God that supposedly sees everybody the same way, and yet my son is saying he can't even be around people who looks like him, not because he doesn't feel comfortable, but because society's going to view him and his friends one way who are black. And now he's running to the comfort of white people. He's only modeling what his dad has done. His dad ran to white communities to try to go for safety, to try to be perceived differently. And it just speaks to the racial dynamics of just how challenging it is for people like Ahmaud Arbery to be in a white community and to have a sense of safety, but yet not be safe because his white friends will look at him differently, knowing that he's the only black kid. And he might experience something thinking that he's feeling safety from society when he's with white people. He's going to end up feeling something different because he will undoubtedly hear something because he's the only black friend amongst white people. So it's just such a challenge. And it's just something that I think I'm grateful we're having this talk to get these stories out.
Any of you have something to add to that? Let me ask this. As black parents, do you have moments where your daughter or your son came to you and asked a question that has to do with race, and you just go, I don't even know where to start. Because you know that there's something wrong, or at this age, nobody should be having that kind of conversation, or that even the question like that coming into their minds, right? Like, for example, I know somebody, I was talking to Rudy today, so you know what, I think you made this comment, and I think Leon too shares something like that you tell your child they cannot play hide and seek. Do you have moments where your child come to you and say, but dad, but mom, tell me, why can't I?
Yeah, I can tell you something just recently came up. My daughter wants to go to a sleepaway camp. I think it was surfing or something like that. And for me, again, I have to think about who she's going to be around, right? And these things that I shouldn't have to. If she loves surfing, I should be able to take her and let her do surfing. But I got to think about how far away it is, how quickly can I get there, right? Who all is going to be there? I mean, these are the type of concerns and questions that I have that maybe the typical white parent who's going to send their kid there is not, right? They're thinking about, oh, it's going to be a great experience. They're going to meet all these great people. And I'm sitting there thinking, how's she going to be perceived, right? If no one else there who is like her, right? And they talk about her hair, or they talk about her body, or talk about anything like that, and I am not there, how does she cope with that? So when you ask the question that, is there ever a question where they come and ask me about race that I can't respond to? No, because I've always been talking to them about that. But when it comes to them asking me the things that they can do, and then I have to color that with my race-colored glasses of, okay, what are the dangers of doing that, right? What are they going to be exposed to? How quickly can I get to them? Then that's where that comes from. So that's where mine comes now. It's not about them asking about race, because just like Rudy does, I've tried to provide them the foundation of America so they understand where all this came from, right? So it's kind of funny that when their grades were slipping, probably about 2 years ago, I had them watch Glory and give me a 2-page paragraph as to the sacrifice that those men did, the mighty 54th, to get them to where they are so they can be in the schools that they're doing and getting the grades that they can, or failing at the grades, that are they doing them the honor of the death that they had. So I try to do the same thing. Formulate that foundation as that this is why America is the way it is. So my kids have seen that, and I've taught them that. And for me, it's not about, I don't know where to begin, but it's more about them still trying to do some of the things that I know that they can't do.
For me, it began more at a primitive level. We've had discussions about race start as young as preschool. And again, it's something that we have to normalize in our household. We talk about race, about day-to-day things. Why can't we do the things that we are not able to do? A simple example that we've had more recently again, well, prior to all of this things happening, my children was at a local park. And there were a group of other children there, and the little girl was handing out cupcakes to all the kids at the park. And of course, being in this environment, as Rudy indicated, my children were the only children of color. And the little girl proceeds to give everyone else at the park a cupcake except my boys. That became a very difficult lesson for me to have to sit them down and say, you are not going to always be treated fairly. This is just what it is. I'm sorry you can't have her cupcake, but thank God that mommy can go get you a cupcake. So, you know, I turn a negative into a positive, but I don't get the liberty of not having to have them face those types of things. It's in their face every day. Even at preschool, little children are discussing race every day. And it matters whether the parents are reinforcing those conversations at home and what they're being taught. That's where I think we really should be working on these things.
You know, all of us here, we have friends of different race, right? The matter of fact, this is Oasis. Oasis is a very diverse congregation. We have Starting from our leadership, we have people from different race, and on Sunday morning, the last time we checked, we have about 14 nations on Sunday mornings worshiping in this building. And it's a beautiful thing to see. So we are constantly engaging this message of reconciliation, because we know that is the gospel, that Jesus died to restore us to the Father and to one another. And the reason we're having this conversation is to say, how can we build a better future? Because all of us agree that something is wrong, that we shouldn't be having this kind of conversation with our children, that you cannot play hide and seek. Like every child should have the honor to do that. But now you're saying, no, you cannot. What can we say to our friends, our white friends that are really looking at the situation? They're going, I want to do something. What can I do? What can I do? Because deeply it hurts to hear that my friends, my black friends, are going through this. But even when it doesn't make sense to them, I hear another pastor say this. He said, the farther away you are from a problem, the simpler it looks. So what can you say to help? Because we're on this journey together. We want to become better. We want to create a better future for our children. Like, okay, this is the next generation, but we don't want 2 generations down the road probably having this conversation. That is our hope. That is our desire, that things get better. What can we say to our friends, our white friends, to really understand and journey with us together as we engage in this message of reconciliation?
I'd like to commend Rudy and Leon and Heather for putting together the RISE conversations on race. And actually, I went to the first session, and my wife April and I, we sat across toe-to-toe with Pastor Jeff of this church, and also Bonnie, his wife Bonnie. And one thing I believe that we can do as people, what can we say to our non-black friends? If there's ever an event like that, you should definitely attend the event. And as far as our non-black friends that deny that there is any type of racism that exists, period, one of the things that I showed my boys and my family was a video where they had children actually playing with dolls. And they had like black dolls and white dolls and maybe mixed dolls, and they asked people like, which doll is the nice doll? Which doll is the bad doll? So if anyone, any non-black people deny that there's any problem with people being looked at differently because of the color of their skin, perhaps they could watch a video like that, or ask us about our experiences and believe what we're telling them.
Yeah, Martin, that's called the doll study, right?
Yes.
I mean, if we go right into Google and put in the doll study, we'll find that example of, and it's been duplicated time and time again from the 60s right up until now, and the results are still the same. Yes. Black children are seeing themselves as the bad one, and white children are seeing black children as the bad one in majority of those cases. So certainly racism does exist to the degree that people are experiencing it. William, you said the further away, you heard someone say the further they are away from a problem, the more simple the problem looks, or the problem is, something to that effect. And I would go so far to say that when it comes to race and my non-black friends, particularly my white friends, because they are so close to me, the problem isn't that simple because they're so close. But there are so many white people who, the further they are away, it's not that it's simple, it's that it doesn't even exist. Because as a black person, we don't really matter to them. It's not their issue. Racism is not their issue. They think it's not their issue. They think that, that's something that black people have to get over. Racism is not something that we have to get over as people of color. We didn't come out and say we want to be oppressed as people of color. We didn't say, please enslave me. For over 450 years, enact Jim Crow law. We didn't say continue to oppress us. And yet, we see so much evidence of that oppression. And so, there are some actionable steps that people can take, that my white friends can take. And number one is to just get close to black folk, to people, to Hispanics, to Asians, to people outside of what is usually their comfort level. And I don't just mean get close. I mean, like, begin experiencing life and having these complex conversations, not just I work with someone, but really saying let's have each other over when COVID is lifted, and let's engage in each other in a way that's meaningful. I would also say that continue speaking up. In the Ahmaud Arbery case, 2 months had gone by since he was killed, and the prosecutors, 4 different prosecutors, people in the district attorney, the state attorney, they had the evidence to press charges, but they didn't until people began to speak up. We often say that all people do on social media is just talk and there's no action. But if it had not been for the white people who spoke up on social media and the white pastors who did something that hadn't been done that I've seen in social media in a long time or ever, which is white pastors speaking up initially about this, I don't think the outcry would have led to the results that we've seen already in a special prosecutor. And I think finally it's important to understand what the local agencies and what the local institutions and organizations that you have in your community that are already doing this work, how can you partner with them? There's national organizations, the National Black Justice Coalition, NBJC, and there are local organizations that allow for us to be connected to certain things that could really speak to the kind of purposeful, actionable steps when instances like this happening. And of course, finally, is to get connected with a church home that really speaks this kind of truth, that isn't afraid to lose members, that isn't afraid to take a hit on the bottom line in terms of tithing and offering because they're speaking about race and people are just tired of hearing about race. That's when it's really important to lean into those churches, because that truly is how you started off your message, reconciliation.
That's really good.
For us, we had to start with the conversations within our home. As I indicated, I'm a South Carolina girl. I married a person from St. Lucia, West Indian. He was not as familiar with a lot of these issues that were so deeply rooted within me. So as I would bring up things and want to address things, it became kind of a conflict of our thoughts because we came from different experiences. And him being from the West Indies, he said that things were a lot more common for the people there. They don't play so much on race, kind of, I guess, maybe to the extent of a northerner in some regards. But he said that there were different races of people in St. Lucia when he was a child. It didn't stand out as much. But again, like Leon and I, being from this type of environment, it's an everyday factor. So there were times when my husband would say, Drika, you're making a big deal out of something, and it's not, because he didn't see it from that perspective. His experience guided him in a different way from me. So within our household, we had to learn to talk openly about the truths that we are living with today. We had to bring awareness to the things that many people don't want to face. They just want to kind of brush it under the rug, kind of like you say, when these major things happen, it's huge for a bit, and then you don't hear it anymore. In my household, we continue to talk about it. We continue to talk about how can we learn from these things. And kind of my conclusion, my closing statement is be open and honest. You may not be able to get to the masses, but you can speak to your neighbor across the street. You can get to know that person that's different from you. You can invite them into your home. Just as Rudy was saying, get to know people on a real level. And I think that's what's most important. Don't just talk to me on a surface, how's the weather? You know, like, how does the weather relate with my melanated skin? Let's talk about that, you know? Let's take our conversations to a more meaningful purpose and just dig deeper. That's really what I think would be most important. Just dig deeper with the people right around you in your environment.
I can tell you this. I echo everything. And thank you, panel, everyone here. Respect everyone's opinion and experiences. And my heart goes out because I understand what y'all have to deal with, because I have to deal with it as well. I think they put it very, very plainly, very simply. The overall theme that we have been using, it's about personal relationship, hands down, right? And what I mean by that is this. When you think about it, if you break down racism to the very simple components, it's a form of bullying more than anything else. And if you have my white friends, and what I try to teach them as well is that if you can bring your kids up to stand up to every form of bullying, whether no matter what state or what form it takes, then you will be raising that individual, that generation up to not see racism, right? Or I won't say not see racism, but definitely to start being able to combat it and be strong and stand up for it. There was another story that really hasn't gotten a lot of press, and I don't remember the city it was in, but there was an armed mob, and Rudy, I don't know if you've seen this or not, but there was an armed mob that was headed up by a correctional officer, a sitting correctional officer. There was maybe about 15 armed, and they were trying to break into this house and take this kid, this black boy, out of the house because a girl had been gone missing for a few days, and they thought that this was the kid who had something to do with it, right? They were in an all-white neighborhood. There was only maybe another black family. Those other white neighbors came out with their guns to support this black family, to say, no, this is not going to happen. This is not going to go down today. That is what's needed. It truly is what Rudy was saying before. You got to see us as being of value. Once you see us as being of value, then you're going to stand up and you're going to speak out. And you have enough people standing up and speak out, it will go away. I truly believe that. But it starts with the personal relationships. And any of my friends out there, if I'm their only black friend, then they are not diverse. Right? If they don't have anyone else, then they are not. They may try to fool themselves because, I got my one black friend. I'm good. I can check that box. That's not true. I have Latino friends. I have Asian friends. I have black friends. I have white friends. I have friends of a different country. Yeah. See, that because I truly believe in that. And the things I try to my white friends, get out there and have personal relationships with people that are other than you, and teach your kids. Just stand up. Stand up.
I know we didn't plan for this either, but I want to hear something from Tiger around, what do you think people can do now, Tiger, with respect to how to treat you differently?
I would say not, like, in classrooms, not treat black children differently. And so, like, I was doing this book club thing with, like, Jason Reynolds and Ibram X. Kendi, and they were talking about how Ibram X. Kendi was in college and he wasn't doing as well as the other students, but there was also white students not doing as well on the same level as Ibram X. Kendi. And they were talking about how they were giving the white kids extra help because they thought that they were going to be able to excel and succeed, and they weren't doing that for Ibram X. Kendi. And so what I think is that teachers need to pay more attention to these things and just help out.
It's such an emotional reaction that I have when I hear my son talk about these things. I would say lastly that if we're not pushing for laws to be enforced and for laws to be written in a way that's anti-racist, the personal connections are great, but if we can't begin to hold people accountable through laws, there was a reason why God gave us the 10 Commandments, gave the children of Israel the 10 Commandments. There's a reason why Jesus said of all of these things, I need you to love God and love your neighbor. I mean, Jesus, God, they're specifically saying, here are the things that you must do. And if we all just rely on the personal connection without having some way to hold people accountable who aren't willing to take those steps, then we're missing out on the teeth behind something that could really drive a society in a particular direction from a large scale.
Wow. Guys, this is really, really so good. And, I'm just getting, I think relationship can teach us a lot that we will never get no matter the level of education we go. Relationship is key. Just connecting with a person of another race and saying, look, I just want to learn. I just teach me. I love when we went through the Rice conversation with peace and justice, like just having that moment where somebody speak the truth and you just listen. Like you're not trying to fix it and say, oh, I'm so sorry. Just acknowledge, wow. Is that what you're experiencing? That relationship and connecting can really teach us a lot. And I really, really believe that when people connect themselves and plant themselves in spaces where they can experience those relationships, they will get a lot more and understand more and engage more and speak more. I read something. I was listening to a podcast. Somebody said, justice is respect. Justice is respect. And I think when people are saying, when there's injustice, let's speak out. What they're saying is, show me that you respect me. Show me that I'm valued. Show me that I'm human, like you, made in the image of God. And I think that is what this conversation is about too. Saying, look, we can all do better. We have a responsibility, and that's why Paul said, God has given us the message of reconciliation. God has given us the message. So we have the responsibility of carrying this message and speaking it out. We are given the responsibility to do that. And the church is the hope of the world. It has to begin in spaces like this, where we're not afraid of engaging in conversations like this and saying, look, we are in this together. How can we learn? How can we grow? How can we make the future better? And I really, really want to, before I give space for final words, if anybody have something to say, I really want to thank you guys. Thank you guys so much for giving your time and speaking something that is, I invited you guys to come and take what happened in your home and put it out there so that we can learn. You gave us, you brought us into your home to experience what you're experiencing. And I think that is courageous, that is bold to do that. And I really, really want to thank you guys for this time that you've given. And I just want to open up any last closing word that any of you want to share and before we end.
Well, I can tell you this, Pastor William, I believe that you are being courageous in doing this. And I think for you stepping out on this, because the majority of the churches are not doing this. And it is because of the fear of losing membership, right? Of losing members, which then translates to revenue, right? Or income, right? Which then means whether or not you can do things you need to do in the community, keep the lights on, all that. So I thank you for stepping out on the faith of God and being courageous and having this. In doing that, I would only suggest that we have more of these. I don't know what form it would take in, but I think there are a lot of individuals that are out there who may think that they're alone, or who may think that there's some kind of handbook. If they don't have the handbook, they don't know how to do it. They can draw on other people's experiences. And then there are some things that I may be trying to do that, what may not go so well, that I find out, well, wow, Rudy did that. Let me try that in my house. Let me say, oh, is that what Drinker did? Let me try that in my house. And it gives a different point of view. It gives a different perspective. It gives a different approach. And I think that we only know that if we talk, right? Because I know what I need to do. to raise my kids. And so I kind of circle the wagons and I kind of do that thing because it's what worked for me. But everyone knows that we're in a different time. People have different personalities. So I can learn as well. And I would never be above learning and understanding that there are better ways or different ways that I can do things.
That is so good. Well, Oasis, thank you so much for tuning in and spending this time with us. We're so honored that we get to connect with you via Facebook this morning. I just want to say a quick prayer. And actually, before I said that prayer, just to let you know that we have a prayer night on Tuesday and we have devotion on Friday at 7 p.m., all of those. And we really want you to connect in because these are kind of things that we want to be praying into. We have this conversation, but prayer also helps. It's essential that we're praying into things that are happening in our country, even lifting the family of Ahmad Albury. I know on Tuesday we did that, but just continue praying for them as you know, it's really hard to watch something like that happen to your child. So we just want to encourage you to tune in during our prayer time so that we can pray together. But also, I want to encourage you to connect. Even though we're social distancing, you can see even here we're sitting apart from each other, 6 feet away. But we just want to encourage you, text messages, phone calls, connect, check on one another, see how your friends and your brothers and sisters in the Lord are doing. That is so key. Helps people to know that they are not alone and we're all in this together. So let me say a word of prayer and we'll just go and have a wonderful lunch. Amen. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the honor of really having this amazing panel, these parents that are sharing their experience as black parents raising children in this culture. Father, I just want to pray that you help us as your disciples to be able to carry truly the message of reconciliation that Jesus died on the cross to restore our relationship with the Father, but also to restore the relationship with one another. And I pray, I know that it's not going to be easy. For sometimes for us to step out of our comfort zone and engage another culture or engage somebody that is different from us. But we thank you that you've given us the supernatural power to be able to do things that we cannot do just in the natural. So I pray for the supernatural power to help us to be able to do that. And I pray for courage. I pray that you will give us peace, that peace will continue to reign. We thank you for this hour. We thank you for this moment. And I pray your blessings over each and every person here. And I pray your blessings over those who are watching from home. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May his light shine upon you. And may he be gracious to you today, tomorrow, and forevermore. Amen.
Amen.